Thank you everyone for joining today's virtual public meeting. As a quick note, we'd like to let you know that this meeting is being recorded for those who are unable to attend and that the recording will be shared afterwards so you won't miss any important details. My name is Ashley Armand, Deputy Director for Community Engagement at the MBTA, and I'm the moderator for tonight's meeting. We really appreciate you joining us tonight. Tonight's meeting is to share information and receive feedback on the MBTA's Red Line High Rail Access Tunnel project. Joining me today is Ronald Guillot, MBTA Project Manager, as well as Brian Miller, our Environmental Engineer and LSP Subconsultant with CDW. They both will give the presentation this evening, and we ask that you please hold all comments until the end of the presentation. Before you get started, I'd like to go over a few meeting controls for folks who are not familiar with Zoom. Next slide, please. Again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate your participation. Next slide. This evening, we offer interpretation. In your meeting webinar controls, you can click the interpretation button. That's a small globe icon, and click the language that you'd like to hear. Today, we have interpretation in Spanish as well as Chinese. Our interpreter who speaks Mandarin is Ellen Zhang, and our Spanish interpreter is Carla Hanafi. Next slide, please. We'd also like to let you know about our closed caption features. You can click closed caption to start viewing closed captioning. As a tip, you can click and drag the closed captioning to move its position in the meeting window. And to adjust the caption size, you can click the upward arrow next to the start video, stop video button and click video settings, then accessibility, and move the slider to adjust the caption size. At this time, we'd also like to introduce the ASL interpretation for tonight's meeting, and it's Andrea Rakoff as well as Jessica Press. You'll see them spotlighted on your screen. Next slide, please. We also are here for any technical questions you may have. If you have a technical question about Zoom or the features of the meeting, please use the chat function. Our technical assistant will attempt to troubleshoot your problem and get back to you. You can write directly in the chat or ask any question to our attendant here who's labeled as Ask Questions here. Next slide, please. We'd also like to let you know about our diversity and civil rights. All MBTA activities, including public meetings, are free of discrimination. The MBTA complies with all federal and state civil rights requirements preventing discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, limited English proficiency, and additional protected characteristics. We welcome the diversity from across our entire service area. If you have any questions or concerns, please visit the website here to reach out to the Office of Diversity and Civil Rights. Next slide, please. I'd now like to pass this off to Ron Guillot to go over the agenda. Ron?
Thank you, Ashley. Good evening, everyone. The purpose of this meeting is to summarize a draft release abatement measure plan, or RAM plan, to manage excess soils generated during construction of a proposed high rail access tunnel. Under the provisions of the Public Involvement Plan for the site revised in 2006, a public meeting is required to discuss any activities proposed under the Massachusetts Contingency Plan that are associated with redevelopment and to solicit public comment and concerns. The draft release abatement measure plan was submitted to Mass DEP on August 22nd, 2024. And a hard copy is located at the Cambridge Public Health Department. To be clear, the intent of this meeting and the focus of it will be on the draft release abatement measure plan. Tonight, during the presentation, we will discuss the project purpose, overview, benefits, timeline, and review the release abatement measure plan, as well as provide time to address questions. Next slide, please. The purpose of this project is to provide additional high rail access to the Red Line Tunnel west of the Charles River. Site conditions are considered mostly vegetated with an existing shared use pathway. The project has been faced with safely addressing site contaminated soils as well as coordinating with landowner IQHQ. Next slide, please. The project will provide the following benefits: improved red line reliability, shorter and less frequent red line shutdowns, resulting in faster customer commutes, fewer vehicular traffic impacts, fewer buses and bus operators, and lower bus fuel and maintenance cost, as well as reduced diesel emissions due to shorter in-tunnel travel distances for high-rail vehicles, increased track time and productivity for both non-revenue and revenue work, which allow maintenance and capital projects to be completed faster and cheaper, as well as resulting in more work to be performed during non-revenue hours in lieu of a red line shutdown. Lastly, operations, maintenance, and capital savings will fully offset the estimated project cost within several years. Essentially, the project will pay for itself. Next slide, please. The MBTA is proposing the project going out to bid, pursuing a construction notice to proceed by March of 2026, with mobilization by June 2026 and anticipated construction completion by March 2028. Next slide, please. At this time, I'd like to introduce Brian Miller of CDW Consultants, the licensed site professional for the project, and he will be discussing the specifics of the release abatement measure plan.
Thank you, Ron, for that introduction, and thank you to everyone who is attending tonight. As you mentioned, my name is Brian Miller, and I'm a licensed site professional with CDW Consultants, and I'll be summarizing the draft release abatement measure plan that we are proposing to support this important project. So first, we'll go through a brief history of operations and regulatory background of the site, the recent soil and groundwater testing that we performed, our plan of excavation, then our air monitoring and decontamination plan, and then I'll provide a summary of the important points. Next slide, please. So a little historic background on the site. As far back as 1919, the property was occupied by Dewey and Almy Chemical Company, who manufactured rubber products and also used asbestos in pilot break scale research and manufacturing. W.R. Grace then acquired Dewey and Almy in 1954 and began to manufacture industrial sealants, gaskets, dispersants for paints, and also manufactured machinery for sealing metal cans. And of note is that naphthalene sulfonate was manufactured on site for use as a dispersant. And by the early 1980s, the manufacturing had ended and environmental assessment of the site had begun. Next slide. Some regulatory background. As I just mentioned, environmental investigations began in the early 1980s. Regulatory closure with Mass DEP was achieved in 2006 with a response action outcome. And at that time, an activity and use limitation, AUL, was recorded. And the main purpose of the AUL was to provide notice of asbestos fibers in soil, and also the maintenance of a 6-inch thick clean soil cap above those soils. Naphthalene has historically been detected throughout the site in soil and groundwater, with secondary contaminants including semi-volatile organic compounds, petroleum hydrocarbons, and metals, although metals were not identified at elevated concentrations in the project area during recent sampling. Next slide. So this is a plan showing the historical configuration of the site. The two red lines show the approximate limits of the proposed high rail access tunnel. You can see former buildings, lagoons, and a former naphthalene tank that was within the footprint of the proposed project, and a former formaldehyde tank that was located near the footprint of the project. These former tanks were the subject of additional soil testing that I'll describe in the next slides. Next slide. So in June of 2024, MBTA conducted soil testing in a 15-foot on-center grid consisting of 64 soil borings. These are the blue dots on this figure. And we didn't sample in the area of the community path that sort of bisects this because that area was under construction at the time. The green dots are the sampling points from the current development project, and you can see that we tightened up the grid quite a bit for our sampling. So a total of 148 samples were analyzed for asbestos, and asbestos fibers were detected in 56 of the 148 samples, so about a third of the data set. 49 of 56 detections were below 1% asbestos, and the highest detection was 1.92%. And we did not observe visual asbestos in any of the samples. All detections were within the top 6 feet of soil and correlate with fill material. Asbestos was not detected in the deeper natural soils, and we feel we have a solid data set that supports this. Therefore, we will assume all soil from 0 to 6 feet to contain asbestos. Next slide. So we analyzed a subset of soil for naphthalene and formaldehyde to evaluate the applicability of certain soils as listed hazardous wastes. And this designation is based on the former manufacture and use of these products at the site, and the former storage of these chemicals in and near the project area. So naphthalene was detected in 12 of 31 samples. Formaldehyde was not detected in any of the 5 samples that we analyzed. 11 of the 12 naphthalene detections were below the Mass DEP reportable limits, with only 1 elevated concentration above those limits. So based on these detections, some soils will need to be managed as a listed hazardous waste. And of note is that naphthalene was not detected in groundwater during our latest sampling in 2024. Next slide. So on the right is a cross-section of the plan of excavation. The upper purple area you can see is the fill soils with asbestos that we had delineated. The green areas beneath are natural soils without asbestos, meaning natural, meaning that they're not fill. And the red areas are soils classified as hazardous waste, or the listed hazardous waste, or hazardous waste soils that also overlap with asbestos soil. So our plan is to perform all work under a RAM plan and excavation of the top 6 feet also under a non-traditional work plan that will require approval from 2 separate bureaus at Mass DEP. We would perform all asbestos soil removal at the front end of the project to minimize the work time needed under this non-traditional work plan. Constant misting and wetting of soils will be conducted during all asbestos soil excavation and loading, and the soils will be loaded directly into trucks with no stockpiling of any asbestos soils. And as I mentioned earlier, some of those soils will also be managed as hazardous waste. So we've estimated that approximately 9,400 cubic yards of soil to be excavated for the tunnel project, and about 3,400 cubic yards of that volume are soils that contain asbestos. Mitigation and monitoring under the non-traditional work plan would start during the sheet pile installation and be carried out through shallow soil excavation. For any areas that are not excavated to the full 6 feet, a temporary clean cap will be placed over asbestos soils as a working surface for equipment. Next slide. So we have proposed 8 perimeter work area locations to monitor for airborne asbestos fibers. These are the locations that you can see in blue and will be placed at the perimeter of the work area. As an added measure, we have also proposed 4 community monitoring locations for airborne fibers. And these are the locations in purple and will be located along the Alewife linear path and also in the IQHQ development, assuming that would be complete at the time of construction. And the locations of these can easily be adjusted to suit the needs of the community. These are flexible locations. All airborne fiber results will be reported within 2 hours of sample collection, and any exceedance of an allowable limit will warrant an immediate temporary work stoppage and corrective actions. Those actions might include, but not be limited to, additional misting and wetting of soils, suspension of work during heavy winds, or modifying excavation methods. And the results are required to be sent to Mass DEP on a daily basis. So the Mass DEP Department of Labor, the Mass Department of Labor Standards Clean Air Criteria allowable limit is 0.01 fibers per cubic centimeter. But as a conservative measure for air monitoring, this project will use 0.007 fibers per cubic centimeter, which is the risk-based limit used on other portions of the same disposal site. And I would note that that project had a longer duration and a larger soil volume than this. We will also have 4 dust monitors for the duration of all soil excavation and movement. And those locations are shown with the black triangles. And those locations are flexible. They'll be adjusted daily based on location of work and prevailing winds. And all trucks transporting soils with asbestos will be lined and sealed prior to transport and will be decontaminated prior to leaving the site. Next slide. So to summarize some key points, all soils will be managed under a RAM plan that is approved by Mass DEP, and the soils with asbestos will also be managed under a non-traditional work plan approved by Mass DEP. Soils with asbestos will be excavated and transported off-site at the beginning of the project to reduce the time needed under the non-traditional work plan and remove those restrictions. Soils with asbestos will be directly excavated into trucks for off-site disposal with no stockpiling of those soils with asbestos. So we are proposing an extensive air monitoring program that will include community monitoring locations, which is not typical of these types of projects, as well as a conservatively low action limit. And I may have not mentioned this earlier, but final capping and construction of the area will be consistent with the plan that was recently approved by Mass DEP for the remainder of the property, which I believe includes 18 inches of clean fill rather than 6 inches. Thank you. And with that, I'll turn it back to MBTA for some final words.
Thank you, Ron and Brian. After learning about this project, we'd love to hear from all of you. The public comment period for the Red Line High Rail Tunnel project will officially close on October 30th. And this is your chance to share your thoughts and concerns and feedback on this important development. And we ask that you also get involved. You can submit your comments and questions through the project's official email at redlinehighrailtunnel@mbta.com, as well as public engagement at mbta.com and bmiller@cdwconsultants.com. You can also learn more detailed information on our website, including project updates and reports. And that website is listed here. That's mbta.com/redlinehighrailtunnel. Next slide, please. Great. So we're now in the Q&A session, and we'd like to open it up for you to ask questions to our panelists. Our panelists for the evening are Ron Guillot, MBTA Project Manager, as well as Brad Nickel, MBTA Deputy Chief of Bridge and Structures, Deborah Darby, MBTA Manager of Remediation in Environmental Department, George Kober, MBTA Senior Director of Capital Delivery Bridge and Structures Programs, Joe Rigney, our Prime Consultant and Project Manager from Delve Underground, Brian Miller, our Environmental Engineer and LSP Subconsultant at CDW, as well as Marty Nee, our Public Outreach Subconsultant at HDR, and Bill Betters, our Environmental Engineer at CDW. If you'd like to share a comment or ask a question, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen to submit your typed question or comment. You can also submit them to ask a question, and we'll alternate between reading the questions and comments already submitted, as well as recognizing those who'd like to pose a question verbally. So we ask that you please be brief so we can hear from as many people as possible. The people who wish to share a question or comment verbally can press the raise hand button. And for those joining on the phone, you can raise your hand by pressing star, then 9. All of our attendees who speak any other languages that our interpreters are present for, you can raise your hand to provide your comments or questions verbally, and our interpreters will hear that and repeat that back to us as well. When we recognize your name, you will be unmuted and you may speak. And after you share your comment, we'll lower your hand and then you'll be returned to that muted state. Before we open the comment and question segment to the public, we'd like to invite any elected officials in attendance or their staff to ask questions or make comments. We ask that you use the raise hand feature so we can recognize you and unmute you. I'm now checking for this now. Great, Representative Owens, I'm going to unmute you now. One moment.
Hi there. Thank you so much for the meeting. Thanks for the information. I think pretty much everybody will agree that it's important to improve the performance of the Red Line and particularly the how quickly maintenance can be done on there. I just had a couple questions. First one around what it seems like the T is ready to entertain changes to the Alewife station. I'm wondering if this is separate from that and why the access to the tunnel wasn't included in potential Red Line station Alewife station changes rather than through a separate tunnel. The other question I have is whether to what I mean the neighborhood has very recently gone through a lot of changes through the asbestos remediation on the IQHQ site, and I'm wondering to what extent that your plans are consistent with the Cambridge asbestos removal ordinances. Thanks.
So good evening, folks. My name's Brad Nickel. I'm the Deputy Chief of Bridge and Structures in MBTA Capital Programs. Tonight, I'm going to try to essentially facilitate this and direct it to the right people on our team if I can't answer. So a couple of things to make sure I got the questions right. Thank you, Mr. Owens. First question, if I heard it correctly, is this part of the Alewife garage project? It is not part of the Alewife garage project. It's a separate project. During our, let's call it alternatives analysis, it was looked into whether those could be combined, and it was not determined to be feasible, at least in the current condition, in current configuration of the Alewife garage. I'm not familiar. My department doesn't handle what those plans are, but we could get back to folks with where that project is at in its trajectory. And I'm sorry, could you repeat the other part of your question? It's kind of two-pronged.
Yes, so the question was regarding, I mean, the IQHQ was, they did all their asbestos remediation under the Cambridge asbestos removal ordinances and guidelines from the city. I'm just want to make sure that that the MBTA is doing their removals consistent with that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. So we're definitely very familiar with that, and we're open to the means and methods. I throw this over to Brian to kind of discuss a little in more detail response to that question.
Yeah, like Brad said, we are familiar with the asbestos ordinance. We are performing all this work, you know, in accordance with Mass DEP guidelines. You know, we've gone above and beyond, I think, by offering more, you know, monitoring locations, a lower action limit. Yeah, like we said, you know, we're aware of the ordinance, but you know, I think we're also trying to go above and beyond, you know, by complying with all the DEP regulations.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. I'm now checking to see if there are any other folks who would like to speak at this time. Okay. Right now, we'd now like to open this up to the general public because I do not see any other elected officials or their staff that have a raised hand. If there are, please message me and I'll be sure to call on you. Thank you. Right now, I am going to move over to a representative from the MBTA Riders Union. Is that what you say, right? No. Okay. Stephen Wenches, I'm now asking you to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. It's Stefan Wunsch, and I'm with the MBTA's Rider Oversight Committee. Thanks very much. I think this is a very quick question. On the slide number 15, there were some green and blue markers for sampling points. The green markers, again, this is on slide 15. The green markers are indicated as previous project sampling points. I'm just curious, can you explain what was the previous project that were those sampling points marked in green, and how far back that was? Is it part of this project, or was it an entirely separate project a decade ago, even further back? And if you don't know the answer, that's okay. We can follow up over email later. It's not important to get an answer right here, right now.
No, thank you. We definitely have an answer for you.
Excellent.
Either Joe or Brian.
Yeah, I can answer that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so back in 2021, the current developer IQHQ did a series of borings in a grid pattern, you know, for their development project. So those were their borings to pre-characterize soil for offsite disposal at that time. So that's for I called it the current project because it's still ongoing.
Got it. Great. Thank you very much. That's the only thing I wanted to ask.
So just to elaborate a little more, I think we were trying to highlight the fact that the grid was a lot more spaced out for that project, and where we are doing our work, it's a lot more concentrated, our sampling and our data collection in that area.
Excellent. Thank you again.
Okay, we received another question in the chat that says, the excavation plan makes no mention of the City of Cambridge's APO requirement for work on this site, including tenting and negative pressure environment for work sites. Will the MBTA comply with this regulatory requirement? And if not, why not?
Well, I'll start with that. Well, MBTA, where practical, will be able to comply with that, and basically some of the Mass DEP criteria. There's issues, I'll just be honest, with the negative pressure tenting with some of the means and methods, with large construction equipment. Got into the street pile driving operation where we, in order to build the tunnel, which similar to central artery type construction, you're going to drive large sheets, 50, 60 feet long with cranes into the ground. So it's very hard to put negative pressure tenting around that. MBTA is open, however, to additional means and methods and able to do that. But I believe, I'll kick this over to you, Brian, maybe coloring a little more details on this and what we are doing in regards to means and methods.
Yeah, so like as I mentioned, we are we'd be doing constant misting and wetting of soils, which is standard practice for all of these sites that have gone through this. We've worked on several of these sites similar to this that have been very successful. We've had we've followed the DEP means and methods and guidance, and have had no problems with detections of airborne asbestos. So and I'll let anyone else from environmental comment if they want.
Brian, just one thing, you hit on something that we might as well get into it a little bit. You've done this a couple other locations within the city, within city of Boston, local, regional, to this. Describe a little bit about some of the successes that, you folks have had on other projects and locations of similar ilk.
Sure, I can describe one project that I worked on, which was Boston Arts Academy right next to Fenway Park. It's a very dense urban area. There was residences right next to it on one side, Fenway Park on the other side. We had to excavate the entire footprint of the project, basically, that had asbestos intermingled in soil. So these are fibers, not chunks of asbestos. And that was all done under, just Mass DEP regulations. We did a significant amount of air testing. We never got a reading above 0.005, I believe it was, for all the data. So we were able to get air clearance. So yeah, it turned out to be a very successful project, and I think we worked on other projects like this as well. Maybe Bill, you want to comment on Somerville High School, which was very similar?
Sure, briefly. Hello, everybody, and thank you for your time. We have had multiple sites where we've performed asbestos and soil mitigation activities and provided perimeter monitoring. And typically, even in these larger scale projects that are substantially greater in volume and duration than this particular project, we're finding very low to no, mostly no, concentrations of asbestos in the monitoring that occurs. And if we do find them, they are below action levels. The mitigating measures of using wind fences and soil wetting and covering with clean soil or other coverings during operations, it proves highly effective. And there is a fair amount of history in using these measures and monitoring to ensure safety, of the surrounding community. And it is fully compliant. And the methods here and the threshold levels that we're monitoring for are lower than the regulatory requirement, just as a conservative measure, which is what MBTA is asking for.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you for that. Our next comment is from Freedom. And Freedom, I also see that your hand is raised as well. So I'll state your comment, and then if there's any follow-up, I'll unmute you. The comment that I see here says, thanks for this meeting. Looks like you left out an agenda item, impact on their neighborhood. Would you like to elaborate, Freedom?
Yes, I would. Thank you. And thanks, Ashley. And thank you everyone for this meeting and this opportunity to discuss this project. I have lived in the neighborhood for 18 years, raised my kids here. It's nice to see many of my neighbors here. Before I have a very short list of things I think need to be addressed. Before I say those things, I just want to say I heard the comment a little while ago saying something like, we all agree. I think comments like that are not helpful in a discussion like this because we don't all agree, and it's important to get input from everyone despite disagreement. To me, a slide that was missing from the presentation is the impact on the neighborhood. For example, how does a project like this affect commuters? What about the noise impact, the vibration impact, dust? I'd like to see it, I'd like to hear all of those items addressed. I'd like to see that in a slide. I'd like to see data about the impact of a project like this on the neighborhood. You have precedent, you've described that a little bit briefly, but I'd like to hear about that in more depth. And the time frame. Also would like to hear examples of not just the benefits and that things went well, but obviously with projects like these, things go wrong. So give an example of a couple of things that went south and how you addressed them. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Freedom. Just trying to keep up with the questions. I want to make sure that we are fair and try to address your points. So if we ask you to, repeat them, please bear with us. Joe, do you mind kind of talking about, just generally impacts? Let's start with just, and maybe this isn't what you're asking. Like, I think the impacts to the neighborhood that we can speak of is starting in construction. Starting in construction, we're looking to get, into construction somewhere in, let's call it summer of 2026. And what's that going to mean for the residences in the neighborhood and the construction? And then we can get into a little bit more of some of the impacts on the site selection and what we tried to minimize. And we can talk to you about some of the risks, because like you said, there's benefits, but there's also risks.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Thanks, Freedom, for the question. Yeah, so I think with the point of this meeting being more towards the ramp plan, we intended on having some further meetings to discuss kind of the project overall, kind of what was happening and the impacts to everyone, with the construction being off a little bit. But we specifically chose this site because it was, pretty far from residences. So we're about 500 feet, actually, I think is a minimum for many residences. So we're hoping vibration impacts are minimal. It is heavy construction, so there will be some vibrations. We will have vibration monitoring on the tunnel and around the area. We will also have ground watering monitoring to make sure that water levels aren't dropping. And so we'll have all types of monitoring, make sure the construction is safe. Sometimes we do get exceedances, and we do have to maybe change the way the operator is working. Maybe they need to do their work a little bit slower or use different equipment to kind of control means. We picked this area also because it's kind of a low traffic area where it's off a private road. So we're hoping that the traffic impacts are much more minimal than other sites that we had looked at. So kind of the community impacts from traffic and just noise vibration. Just with the site being at where it is, that was a big part of why we chose that there. So I think that's a little bit about kind of what you could expect outside of kind of just the RAM plan, the ear monitoring and so forth that we're going to be doing. Maybe there's a higher degree of misting or something that's needed. But those are the type of things that we'll continue to monitor and adjust as needed, whether it's vibration, ground deformation. We'll also be monitoring to make sure we're not seeing any type of settlement in the area there.
But to the point, this the duration is going to be for construction, Joe, roughly.
Yeah, we're looking at, we said June 2026 to March 2028. So I think it's a year and 9 months, more precisely, of kind of when they show up and when they leave. One of the things that we didn't touch upon is that the asbestos removal we're trying to keep to just 2 months. So we will put in the sheet piles, which are kind of vibrated, pushed into the ground, as I'm sure some of you know. And then we're going to start to excavate the soil and be monitoring from the minute we start putting the sheet piling in. But we're hoping that's kind of behind us, and then it's kind of tunnel construction as usual from there on out. And again, the last couple months of that construction period will be sort of cleanup phase.
So, and to speak a little bit of that, I mean, this is heavy civil construction. We are going down, what about on the magnitude of somewhere between 25 and 30 feet?
30, 35.
30
yeah.
feet.
Yeah.
So the type of tunnel construction is going to be similar to what was done in the central artery, which is called cut and cover tunnel, where you drive the sheeting on the side, you cut down, and then we cover and cap it. It's going to be a mixed ramp on the way down. So there will be, construction activities in that area. Though, like Joe said, there'll be movement of materials very early on, and then there'll be, essentially the building out of the tunnel and basically the casting of the walls and the breach down below, and then all the site work that's included in that. So on the magnitude of 2 years, I would say. And some of the risks, I mean, it would be general construction risks that we run into, like we have with everything else, supply chain. We don't think that we're going to run into too many different site conditions once we get the soil out of there. It's pretty straightforward. I don't know if, to answer if it was more directed at Bill or Brian, on some of those projects that you've had, you were claiming successes, were there some risks and things that went wrong that you needed to mitigate with basically the LSP component of it?
I can start, anecdotally. Sure, things don't always go according to Hoyle on these large construction projects, but the non-traditional work plan has mitigating measures in it as part of the plan to be approved. So, if there are issues like perhaps a weather event that creates difficulty, then operations will cease, or there will be a call to not perform construction or removal activities in that particular period until the weather becomes more favorable. If there are things that are unanticipated, then work shuts down immediately and covering occurs immediately, or wetting occurs immediately if it's related to an asbestos soil management issue. There are all types of mitigating measures that come into play, and they're exercised as may be needed. And then the data are always acquired as well to establish, whether there is a perimeter issue or not. And our experience has been largely that there are not perimeter issues when it comes to these things. There may be a localized construction footprint issue, but a gross release into the outside the perimeter of the work area is quite rare. Quite rare. I don't know if that answers the question of what you're looking at.
So I'll go back to Freedom to see if we captured what you were asking for the most part. One thing I will say to you folks and globally, I understand, we hear you want to know more about the project. MBTA is definitely committed to coming back out and giving you more of the details of where we're at in the design trajectory and what we're doing, for sure. And we can get into a cadence on that. Tonight, we were hoping to focus on the RAM plan, but we understand and will gladly field your questions. But yes, we will. We hear you. We will come back out. We will give you more information, and we'll try to be a better partner going back and forth with the sharing of that and coordinating these things.
I appreciate the answers. I don't want to take time from other folks who have their hands up, so I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Freedom, and feel free to raise your hand later and we'll be sure to call on you. Next on the line is Jason Stonehouse. I'm asking you to unmute yourself now.
All right, thank you very much for taking my question. Thank you for the end comment, and thank you for the presentation. I put a number of questions into the ask questions here. I can go ahead and summarize those briefly. You've already answered questions regarding the City of Cambridge APO. I'd love to hear more follow-up on that and on the disregarding of the city's regulations, which are more strict, which to me would be going above and beyond the Mass DEP requirement. This area also is within a area that floods frequently in the Elway floodplain. And I'm concerned if the RAM plan has any contingencies in it for addressing flooding and that causing an inadvertent release of material. It being a tunnel, I expect that it's going to be a low point. The flooding from the adjacent pond that's nearby there, just off of that access road, as well as the Jerry's Pond area, another contaminated area. I expect to see that if we get regular frequent rains, that area does flood, that does cause overflow of material into adjoining areas. And I'd like to hear what the RAM plans, what the contingencies are for containing any inadvertent release in that case.
Thank you, Jason. Joe, do you mind getting into some of-
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah, thanks, Jason. So when we install the sheet piles, which are kind of the temporary walls, those are going to have some stick up above the ground for kind of just general construction safety, making sure no one falls in the excavation. But coincidentally, they'll also provide flood protection. So the 100-year flood in this year, I think, is, like 1.3 feet, above the kind of normal ground surface that we have over there. So the sheet piles will be above that. So any flood waters that came around would be contained by the sheet piling. And as Brad's kind of alluded to, some of the means and the methods that we'll get into is we'll have provisions in the contract for the contractor to be ready to kind of add additional flood proofing if needed. Primarily sandbags and in a tarp to help contain that. So anyway, so all the flood water should stay contained outside of our excavation as if we weren't doing anything. It's kind of the answering kind of maybe the last question you had, but I think Brian or Bill might be able to speak to the first part of Jason's question. Unless I answered it, I'm sorry. I think I might miss part of it.
I can jump in real quickly and just say that inherent in the RAM plan being compliant with the MCP, there is a responsibility to not exacerbate site conditions. So where there's some degree of uncontrolled flooding that occurred that could redistribute contaminants that are already on site, those would have to be contained and mitigated. And there is a provision in the RAM plan, aside from the sheet piling, which we think is going to be highly preventative of that type of scenario. There is a provision to have vacuum trucks available if in the event that we need to remove any excess water. It would be captured with a vacuum truck and brought to a proper facility for disposal and treatment.
Thank you.
Thank you. That is appreciated. The other questions that were put in the chat, I look forward to seeing additional follow-up on that regarding the City of Cambridge APO, and I'll take those offline. I also am very grateful to see this project being done. I think it's long overdue to have. I'm glad to see the MBTA is able to start to again make this type of investment in the improvement and reliability of the Red Line. So I'm very glad to see that this is being done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just as a FYI, all the questions that are asked here are going in the order that they were received, both in the asked questions here as well as in the chat, as well as taking into account all of the raised hands. So we will get to your question as we go through the list. And Jason, you've asked a lot of them and we have them noted as well. So we'll be sure to raise all the ones that you haven't already raised while you were unmuted. So we'll now transition on to the next question, which is, I've seen some people concerned with how the MBTA has previously managed tree removal. What will be done with this project to minimize the removal of trees, especially mature trees, and how will these trees be replaced?
Thank you. Joe, do you mind starting that one off?
No, not at all. Yeah. Yeah. There will be trees removed as part of the project. We're submitting the NOI to City of Cambridge, and that'll be discussed at their hearings. But in general, there's 30 trees that are being removed and 30 trees that are being replaced. The trees are being removed are primarily over the tunnel, but we do put back, quite a bit of vegetation, with the tunnel being underground. And then there's a ramp structure that'll be kind of screened, with trees. But again, all that'll be kind of shared later on.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. The next question we received is there a plan to coordinate activities and abatement with the adjacent project Alewife Park, which is currently under construction?
Joe, I'm gonna go that way with you.
Yeah, I think the timeline of their project, if I'm not mistaken, is going to be completed before we get out there in 2026. So the two of us should not be on a similar construction path.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Mike, I'm requesting you to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you for having this meeting. It's a very important area, central to a lot of where people pass by and use daily. The T is having improvements to the T is something that we all would appreciate. So we like the idea of having this access nearby, but we're questioning some of what went into choosing this site, which is highly contaminated with primarily our concern is asbestos, which is different from other chemical contaminants. It was a desirable material because it is fire resistant, but it also doesn't evaporate, melt, dissolve, or otherwise degrade. It stays in place, which is fine if it's buried in untouched soil. It's not so great if it gets inside someone's lungs and becomes stuck as a lifelong irritant. I'm a biomedical engineer by my career, and so I pay attention a lot of the physiology. And asbestos was one of the first materials to be proven as cancer causing, which tends to show up after decades of irritating the lungs. This site is next to kids' ball fields that are used by kids throughout the city. If asbestos blows into the fields, it will stay there as the kids, who are shorter and closer to the ground than adults, are running around, breathing heavily as they stir up the dust. They're also growing, which means that their cells are reproducing more. So damage gives opportunities for mutations to occur as the cells reproduce, and they have decades of lifespan for the cancer to develop. Your main protection is wetting down the soil, which is not what the Cambridge Asbestos Protection Ordinance says is protective enough. State regulations are generally the minimum that can be applied anywhere in the state, but this is a very densely populated area. Air monitoring will only tell you that you've already released asbestos into the neighborhood after the fact. IQHQ was able to follow the Asbestos Protection Ordinance. We don't want just better than average for what other areas in the state do. We want what the city requires. So we want to know, why can't you be as creative in your construction methods as the current property owner, IQHQ, in their massive development project over the past years and ongoing? They've been able to do things to protect our kids and the neighbors. And that's one of the bigger concerns we have because of the nature of asbestos, because there haven't been a lot of state guidelines on what to do with it when it's outdoors, but there are hundreds of pages of regulations if it's indoors. This is different because we've identified the problem and addressed it. A totally side issue is, I just want to clarify, you said you're going to take down 30 mature trees. Are you going to replace them with mature trees also, or 30 saplings? So I just wanted to find out what that was. Thanks.
Thank you. Start by saying, obviously, MBTA is concerned about everyone's health in regards to this. I mean, it's something that we don't take lightly. I mean, that's goes kind of with that's something that we take very seriously. I think that we're not at the minimum level of what we're proposing here, and there are challenges that our construction is different than what what IQHQ provided. We're certainly open to coordinating additional means, methods, whatever we can do to try to improve this to a point where, you know, we believe we're above and beyond the standard of care. And Brian, I don't know if you can walk through a little bit of the technical details, but to answer this.
Yeah, I think it's important to realize that the standards that we're proposing, well, first of all, the standard, the 0.01 fibers per cubic centimeter it's a risk-based standard. So, you know, that's protective, that's of a long-term exposure. And that's a protective of a long-term exposure for people, you know, without respirators, and for people that could potentially, you know, have some sort of lung issue to begin with. We're proposing an even lower limit than that, which is also a risk-based limit. And the limit we're proposing is, you know, you would need to be exposed to that limit every day for 12 months, you know, for a significant risk of cancer. So, you know, I think we are, with our sampling and our monitoring, we are, you know, trying to go above and beyond. And you know, like we said, we're open to more testing if we need to do that. So I don't know if anyone else has anything else to add.
I want to point out that the National Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry provides toxicological profiles of various hazardous materials. And for asbestos, at least the last time I had read it, it said there is no safe minimum. That it means that any amount could be considered dangerous because they haven't found a lower limit. So saying that it's a lower risk, that's fine. But what is the balance of your risk versus why wouldn't you do something more protective when there's so many people who could be impacted from it? When we have a methodology with the tents that were done just next door for where you propose. These are huge tents with doing the wetting inside, and then you have an additional physical barrier so that wind can't dry out any portion of soil. Or if a truck goes a little deeper and gets into soil that isn't wet, the dust doesn't get blown off site. So there are multiple backup protections that we have in that way. And why wouldn't you do something like that in such a contaminated area, or choose an area that's not so contaminated next to such a vulnerable user group so close? I'm part of the Alewife study group, and we spent a lot of time looking at this specific area to prevent it from being dug up during construction because it was so contaminated compared to other areas in the site. And it's one of the closest areas to the ball fields. And we were pretty happy that that area was going to be untouched and left as a natural area. And we're kind of surprised to see it now as a potential source, now that all the heavily contaminated areas at the IQHQ site, they're done removing all the heavily contaminated soil, done under tents and showing no exposure. And you're proposing a plan that doesn't have nearly the same amount of backup protections. I agree that it can be done without exposure if everything goes right, but we're concerned of what happens if it doesn't exactly go right. It's hard to control those big yellow trucks. And just want to bring those points up. Thanks.
So to your point, MBTA is definitely open to additional means and methods. that would facilitate the practicality. You know, I mean, we got to be able to build the thing, and but we are concerned about that, and we are open to other means and methods. If we can make that work. Our construction is different than IQHQ. So we're definitely open to that. We're open to considering that. We're open to doing the right thing, and we're going to do the right thing. So,
okay, I hope so. It can be done, I'm sure. And we're looking to you to take that investment, and because there's so many people involved.
Let me just say it this way: if it's something that comes down to just additional resources, the MBTA will do it. Let me just say that we can make it happen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. We'll now transition this over to Tom.
Hi, thanks for this. I'm Tom Gould. I'm a North Cambridge resident, and I want to thank you so much for having this meeting and for the showing the culture of problem solving that the T seems to be moving towards, improving the maintenance of the red line. We're all grateful for that. But I did have one question that sort of goes away from the site, which is why here? What were the other sites considered for the project, and why was this site chosen?
So thank you very much for the question. So we did do an alternatives analysis, and we looked at a number of locations in this area. Some of the criteria that we got into with this was, not only does it have to work from our operational standpoint, and when I say that is, you know, we're in the business of moving people, running trains every day. I mean, you folks are most likely red line riders, and you've experienced, you know, some of the pain that we've been through, and we've tried to get to a point where we're getting back to, you know, removing speed restrictions, doing a lot of deferred maintenance. I mean, we have an aging system that's hard to maintain because of just its nature. We looked at different locations that, you know, towards the end of the line that just wouldn't work for us operationally, due to how we store trains at the end. We obviously can't have an access point where our train storage, and then that would indicate how we do operations otherwise, and how we, you know, it just waterfalls down the line. One of the other things we were looking at is trying to minimize distances from neighborhoods. This was the site that was it had the furthest distance. We did look at a bunch of the different sites as well. And Joe, maybe you can speak a little more detail. I'm kind of high level on.
Sure, yeah, and I think this speaks a little bit to Mike's question as well. But yeah, we knew it was not ideal working on a site with contaminated soil, but that was really the one negative that we had, and we felt through Brian's experience and just everything else we were seeing, we could control the asbestos. Which at the end of the day, that's what it's about, making sure it's not getting in the air versus how you're making sure it doesn't. We looked at sites near Alewife Station. We looked at sites to the west of Alewife Station. We looked at some a little bit further to the east. Generally, the area around Alewife Station was what worked kind of from a geometry standpoint. The Red Line tunnel starts to get deeper before you get into Boston, which would mean a much longer tunnel to get into the existing Red Line. So we needed to start somewhere that was a little bit more shallow. But we have trains that are parked during the off-revenue hours from Alewife Station all the way to the end, to what we refer to as the tail tracks to the west. And largely when we use the access tunnel, it's going to be in the wee hours of the morning where those trains are going to be parked. So if they're there, we're not able to get at it. That's a major constraint. We also wanted to limit impacts on the right-of-way. So what's nice about this tunnel construction is it's generally pretty simple from a tunnel perspective. It's mostly on the outside, not impacting the right-of-way itself. It's got kind of the least sensitive kind of structural implications as to the other areas that we had looked at. And then, as I mentioned before, it was relatively far from residential areas and had relatively low traffic impacts. So a lot of positives. I understand the one negative, but we do think we can overcome that, and just kind of looking at 5 different sites, and then multiple alignments among those sites. This really was the best one.
Thanks, Joe. And to elaborate kind of on what Joe says, just for, I think we assume people understand, but we try to do our maintenance work on what we call non-revenue hours, which would be on the overnight when we stop running trains. So we have a very small window overnight. And right now, our closest access point is what we call First Street Gate, just west of, basically it's like between Charles and Kendall. And to get out there, we can basically, once we kill power, we have very limited time to do any work to the west on the red line. So this location, from that perspective, offers us a western location to be able to do tunnel maintenance and capital improvement work, and to basically modernize our section of the red line there. In the working on non-revenue. Otherwise, if we don't work non-revenue and kind of chip away at it in small pieces, there's these big diversions, and that's where you get the bigger impacts, where we have shutdowns and busing and 2-3 seat rides and what have you. And we're trying to minimize that. So that went into a lot of the thinking of this location as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. The next question we have is, would it be possible to explain the meta timeline / schedule, which may need to combine the garage replacement, new tunnel, and the MA bridge reconstruction to fit all these pieces together? That is, how many years? So again, I'll say it again. Would it be possible to explain the meta timeline / schedule, which may need to combine the garage replacement, new tunnel, and the MA bridge reconstruction to fit all these pieces together? That is, how many years?
Well, let me just say, it's very hard for us to answer that. That's not, we're not involved in the garage project. And I'm guessing the MAB, I'm guessing it's the MassDOT Bridge project. So I do not have a good sense of the timeline. I'd have to get back to folks on that with the garage project. That's not underneath our purview. And I'm not sure what the nature of that is, if that's going to be NBTA or kind of like a public-private partnership to do that, and where that is in status and or funding and schedule. I can say that this project is fully committed to by the MBTA, so we do have money to move it forward. It is in our capital improvement plan. Joe, you can speak a little bit to the coordination with MassDOT, maybe. In that,
yeah, really all three.
Please.
I think, Brad.
Okay,
I think, yeah, I think in terms of timeline, from what I saw in MassDOT's last public meeting, I think we were hoping they were done before we started construction. It sounds like their schedule may be slipping a little bit, so we're continuing to coordinate with them. And look for opportunities of where, maybe our work overlaps, and it kind of lessens the blow for the impact for the public. So we're continuing to coordinate with them, but the original hope was they were going to be done before we get out there. The garage project, I think, is on a much further track, where just through my own followings of kind of, what I hear, it sounds like they're in the very early stages of just planning, where I think this tunnel will be in service before that garage project happens.
That's correct, Joe. That's why I didn't want to, we don't want to commit to the timeline on the garage, but we've taken measures just to kind of jump ahead to coordinate with MassDOT, right, Joe? There's a bridge project, and then there's also that tunnel as well, right?
That culvert structure is not getting touched, as far as I understand. Right. It's the Alewife Brook right near Russellfield Head House that's getting replaced.
But okay, thank you. But as far as that tunnel, I know there's interest. We've tried to be sensitive to the interconnectivity of all the trails and bike and access through there. That's definitely something that's been considered in our design, correct, Joe?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. We understand that there's potentially a bike path or something planned through there, and yeah, nothing we're doing is going to preclude that.
So we just wanted to get into that a little. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And please note, everyone, that all the follow-up questions that we have or comments that you have that require follow-up, we've made note of that, and we'll get back to you as well. The next comment that we have is, the why is clear. Well, it's a comment and a question. The why of this is clear, but the where and the how it will impact us is still not clear. Questions. 1, please show the exact work areas with marking of the exact facilities and buildings. Will this affect use of Alewife linear path, pool, fields? Sandy, is it okay if I actually unmute you so that you can ask your question out loud? That might be better. Are you in the capacity to be unmuted? You can ping me yes or no, just because I think you sent a couple questions also to ask questions here, and I want to make note of everything that you're asking. So I'm going to unmute you. One moment.
Hi.
Hi, Sandy.
All right, I'll try. Let's see. So the announcement for this meeting was very clear about why you want to do it, but it didn't really provide, and I still don't really see a clear image of exactly where this is going to be, both during the construction and once it's complete, how it's going to affect the sort of in and out of the tunnel, etc., how it's going to affect the linear path, the fields, the labs, the homes. You know, there was mention during this meeting of this being a low traffic area, but it's really one of the most densely populated areas, and the land here is extremely all year round, very well used for people moving from one place to another, walks, bikes, etc., playing on the fields, in the pools, etc. So that's the first part. And you know, the noise and vibration, it's not just during construction, but once it's in operation, what's that going to be like? Even the labs, how's it going to affect them? And I think that that's the general idea of what I'm asking.
Thank you. Joe, do you mind taking this?
Yeah, no, not at all. Yeah, I can see, kind of your point. Yeah, I probably shouldn't have said low traffic, relatively low. I mean, I don't think anywhere in this year could really be considered low. But yeah, we plan on having another meeting to discuss kind of the more specifics of what is going to happen, how the thing's going to be built and what it's going to look like. I don't think we wanted to distract this meeting with kind of, some of those details on there. But yeah, we will have another meeting that describes how the tunnel will function, how doors open, how people access, and so forth. So that stuff is forthcoming. But in general, is that we will be using this mostly at nighttime. We don't expect it'll be very loud as they're coming in. It's got about 100-foot ramp section and then 150 feet underground, and then we showed on kind of the aerial image in the beginning, there's a little paved access road before we cross over the existing multimodal path. There's a flood door that'll open up, and then the highway vehicle will go down, and then the door will shut. So it's very minimal impact of that multimodal path when a vehicle's coming in and out, but a meeting of kind of just discussing, the construction and then the long-term use of the tunnel will be held in the future, but we want to keep this one more on the RAM plan, which is the biggest kind of public impact. I think you'll see the other ones really are not a great impact.
Well, if you have graphics of that, that would be very helpful to post as soon as possible, because, in addition to the contaminants, this is an area that you don't need 100-year flood. There's unfortunately CSOs that are regularly happening there, so that's also going to be a factor.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Yes, we will definitely come back with more, let's call it engineering detail and impacts and how the construction flow to you folks
Thank you.
for sure.
You've definitely made note of that. Thank you. We'll now transition this over to Diane and then Anne. Diane, are you able to unmute?
I'm trying.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Actually, I wanted to talk a little bit about future meetings, you've said that basically the comment period is until October 30th. Is that correct? Because we just found out, the neighborhood just found out last week about this project. And we're going to need more time. We're going to need more time to process this and for and to communicate about it. And so I'd like to know what your plans are for future meetings. Several times during this meeting, you said, well, we're gonna meet in the future and discuss this. At what point are we expected to have all of our how we feel about, our feedback? When does that have to be in?
So, thank you. I think the basis of this meeting was related to the public comment period for the RAM plan, which there's a 30-day window, specifically related to that MCP based. And if you folks want to file for an extension, we encourage you to do that. I mean, it's not something that we'd fight. We want you to have involvement on that, but to the project level impacts, that will be in the future where we'll be able to have a dialogue and understand, some of your folks' concerns, to be able to incorporate it into the design. So, I mean, we aren't going into construction, and we won't have final design until, somewhere, let's just say end of 2025, 26. So there's a whole bunch of window here where we can go into some of these things on the project and to get your input prior to finalizing the design.
And when do you expect the next meeting to happen, for public meeting?
We'd be open to what you folks want on that cadence. We could come back we could come back again this year if you'd like. I mean, that's something that, we're open to.
Okay, we'll be back in touch with you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Diane. Anne?
Hi, this is Anne McDonald. I'm a North Cambridge neighbor who walks the right around the site every single day, multiple times along the bike path, along the road that you're going to be coming off of underneath the rounded tunnel. And I think when you said there's not much traffic here, that's true of cars. And this was the same problem when we went to the DOT meeting about the bridge replacement. We're coming at this from people on the ground, many people passing through this area, commuting, playing, walking. And it is a very, as other people have said, a very well traveled and used area. And I think there's a lot of stress to this neighborhood that I understand this is really going to help us as Red Line riders, as people who want public transit to work better. I just wish there had been a little bit more of a pullback for a minute in saying, now that we know the garage is going to be redeveloped, can't that be part of this construction? We've just lived through all this IQHQ construction, and then the bridge, and then your project, and then the garage. It's really great that this much attention is going to this space, but if you're living in it and trying to raise your kids in it, I think it's a stress that's not being seen. We're worrying about cars as traffic. And I am really concerned about it being in the floodplain. I know we've talked about mitigation in relation to the construction, but I've not heard about mitigation in relation to groundwater, stormwater runoff, anything like that in relation to the site. So I would love to hear a little bit more about that. And I wish there could be a moment where, instead of assuming it has to go here, there could have been some discussion about the possibility of all the construction we're going to have for the garage. We waited, I don't know, 45 years for this tunnel. What's another few years in at least scheme of things? I know we're anxious to get the Red Line working better, but if you could speak to the issues of timing and then also the floodplain, that would be helpful.
Oh, let's start with the floodplain. Joe.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, we did look at the flooding. What we have above ground for the ramp structure is relatively small. It will take up some volume in the event of a flood, and we've regraded kind of to where our proposed tunnel will meet the existing tunnel, kind of above grade over there. And that'll create some compensation for whatever volume we take up. It's going to regrade over there. So there's kind of a no change in kind of the flooding impacts of the area. And then in terms of the garage, I think that the biggest thing, I talked about construction timeline and so forth, but in terms of an access tunnel, the biggest non-starter operationally is that they park the trains from the platform all the way through the tail tracks. So we still have the issue of that's where they park the trains and we can't get by it with the high rail vehicle. So that's really was probably the biggest constraint just from an operational standpoint. And certainly hear your concerns about the path. You just live through that, kind of getting it shut down. The detour I don't think is extremely long. I understand it's still a pain in the neck, but as you mentioned, it is for the greater good.
Can I just ask a follow-up? So I thought you said that the trains were parked out to the east, but you're saying they're parked at the garage?
They're from the garage to the west.
The west.
Right, up to the west.
Right.
I guess it would be nice if that was part of this meeting about why do we need this? Here are the things we've looked at, showing them to us so that we can come along with you, because I think there is a lot of trust in the MBTA's actions right now, but there's also a lot of confusion about everything people are trying to do in this area.
Understood. And it's a well-taken point. One of the things that we do get constrained by is, we do have safety and security issues around our operation in our tunnels and what information we can and can't divulge. That being said, we're more than willing to come back and go through some of the alternatives and kind of the why we landed on where we did from a high level and what we can talk about related to that.
Thank you.
No problem.
Renata?
Hello, Renata Pomponi, Senior Director with Mass Audubon. I've been fortunate to be working with the community over the past 3 years related to the Jerry's Pond project. And I have more just a comment than a question at this point. I think, in addition to all you've heard from the community around their concerns around the contamination issues and things like, flood storage, soil disturbance, and stormwater, I just want to also emphasize the amount of discussion that's happened over the last 3 years around some of the other environmental issues like tree canopy, wildlife habitat, invasives management, and runoff, and that the community input that's been given and the decisions that have been made over the past few years on the other project have all been around the assumption that this particular area would remain undisturbed. And so I'm really encouraged to hear that you are welcome to more input on the project. And we'll definitely be looking for information on those sides of the project in further community discussion and in the CONCOM filing, and with hopes that they will meet the same levels of environmental consideration and stewardship that was met on the other project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Renata. Okay, now transitioning on to our next comment here / question. Okay, so that looks like it's a duplicate and we've already answered it a few times, so I'll skip that one for now. Moving on to our next one. Was that exposure limit established for the adult population, or is it also based on an evaluation of exposures on children?
Brian?
Yeah, so that exposure limit includes adults and children.
Thank you for that. Would removing all the contaminated soil under tents before beginning to drive piles not be feasible?
There's a process to it, but Joe, please.
Yeah, with the depths that we're talking about, we need a supportive excavation system to be able to remove that. So, I mean, we start off with disturbing ground in the act of just trying to create a safe excavation to do so, if that makes sense.
Our next question.
Go ahead, please.
Brad, do you have anything to add, or can I transition?
I do not. I just, to repeat, we are open to looking at whatever means and methods we can do in phasing.
Got it. Next question. Why not use the maximum protection humanly possible for asbestos mitigation? You're talking to a population who is wary of being put in harm's way and was relieved to hear that asbestos disturbing activity was finally over.
So I'll start on that. To what we can practically do and be in phase into our construction, we will do.
Thank you for that. As many of us in the neighborhood know, the Cambridge Asbestos Protection Ordinance was developed and signed into law in 1999, specifically in response to concerns about potential development at this site. I'm one of the many on this call who were part of that effort, and I'm happy that the City Council has upheld the ordinance over time, including in the recent IQHQ development. To the best of my knowledge, the requirements of the ordinance are not optional. Have the MBTA and its contractors discussed this project's construction plan with the Cambridge City Council?
I believe we did meet with the City of Cambridge. George?
That is correct. We have met with the city manager and their department regarding this project. And but as far as I know, I don't think we have not had any face-to-face meetings with members of the Cambridge City Council.
Thank you for that. The next comment is, please speak about the potential for groundwater contamination through construction and what you're doing to mitigate it. Will you be dewatering? The site you've chosen is in a historic swamp, and developers have found that they are pumping out orders of magnitude greater volumes of water from sites nearby where they are building. What protections will be in place for the adjacent wetlands and the nearby Alewife Brook? Gwen, if there's anything else in your question that I've missed, I am opening it up to you being unmuted. Just want to make sure I captured.
Thanks. Yeah. It's two questions, but yes, I'm here.
Does that suffice, or are there any other parts?
Brett, did you want me to take that one?
Yeah, please, Joe.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Our intention is to have a watertight excavation where the sheet piles that we put in are meant to be watertight. And then we'll also have a jet grout plug, which will keep kind of any groundwater from migrating up to the surface. So we're sort of working in a bathtub, and we'll also be monitoring the groundwater, make sure we're not changing that by any way. So the groundwater should stay where it's at, prohibiting any further migration with contamination.
So there'll be restrictive measures in the means and methods and the specifications that are upheld to mitigate groundwater intrusion, right, Joe?
Yeah.
So sorry, I'm not an engineer. So you're saying that the mitigations that you have in place for asbestos, naphthalene, whatever the many contaminants that are historically here from the Dewey and Olney, you're saying that there are mitigations in place for contaminants in water as well as in soil, or because the water is not supposed to be leaving the site, you don't contain it or constrain it? Like, it's just meant to stay in place unless there's a flood?
Joe.
Yeah, so we basically put a box in the ground that's watertight. You know, we remove the soil in that box, and really everything outside of that's not supposed to know that something's happening, you know, kind of in a simple sense, if that makes sense.
The box is, outside the box is not being disturbed.
Correct.
Okay, other than the box,
Within the
putting the
box.
box in itself, right? Like the actual installation
So-
of the box. And
so-
is that one box or several boxes consecutively? Is
It's
the
one
whole site?
One large
one
box.
box.
Yeah, so the best way I would describe it, I don't know if you know, like a cofferdam. Like if you were doing like construction in like a marine setting, there's the sheet piling, it's a big box, and then you dewater underneath that. So everything that we're doing is contained right within that area. Correct, Joe? Fair enough?
Yeah, that's right. I think she said she's not an engineer, so she.
Yeah, I don't want to.
Oh, yeah, that helps. Any more words you throw at me will help. Thank you.
Yeah.
But what you're saying, you are dewatering underneath it. So my question is there water? No,
No, we're
Sorry.
we're not dewatering.
not
Yeah,
in this case. In a normal cofferdam, that's what you're talking about. Okay. Just
even
because-
in a cofferdam, like if you're building a bridge pier where you're in a body of water, you're trying to keep it dry in there with just the watertight walls penetrating into, I'll say, an impervious area where you're not letting the water
Okay.
fill up in that pit.
So
So you are containing the water that is going to be contaminated within the box while the material, the solids are being contaminated, and the water is not going to leave the site. You're drying out the material and then removing it as a solid. So there shouldn't be water moving, contaminating, leaking or anything.
That's right. Yeah, and the trucks that the soil will be moist when they're taking it out, and the trucks will be aligned, to make sure that there's no water escaping kind of that excavated soil there.
that's all part, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, please jump in. Like as part of some of this non-traditional work plan for the handling of the soil, and you have basically some of the monitoring as well. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that as it relates to contaminants within our box in the area?
Yeah, I think we're assuming that there may be a very small amount of dewatering at the beginning. Is that correct, Joe? Just to, start off this whole process, and then once you get the sheet piling in, it's kind of self-contained.
Well, the sheet piling goes in before we do the excavation. Yeah, the only dewatering we're going to have is what I'll call kind of passive dewatering, where it's raining and there's water getting in the pit and we're pumping that out. I mean, it's really kind of, and maybe there's some leakage, in the wall that we have to address, but it's considered to be very minimal.
Water getting in the pit and you're pumping it out where? To where?
They'll be in the non-traditional work plan. Brian, you got the frac tank.
So,
You wanna speak to
so I mean, it could be done one of two ways. It could either be done with a permit for discharging and treating, through carbon filters or that type of thing. Or if it's it's a very small volume, then it just could be pumped into vac trucks and just hauled away.
Otherwise filtered and treated and dumped into the Alewife Brook or to the stormwater drains?
We haven't
guess
identified.
You haven't
the
identified
discharge
that yet.
point.
So just know there are a lot of people thinking about water around here, and it's very near. If you are not in a wetland, you are very, very close to a wetland, like a declared wetland. So a lot more detail for the community ahead of time would be really helpful, because we have so much water pollution going on around here that it's wearying.
I think it's fair to say anything within we'll call it our box or bathtub, that we're gonna handle in accordance with whatever safe regulations we need to from a means and method standpoint.
Okay. I'm warning you that the developers were astonished by the amount of dewatering they had to do. It was much more than they anticipated. So just heads up.
Understood.
It's a swamp.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gwen. David?
Hi, I'm David Bass. I'm a retired hazardous waste remediation engineer. I was deeply involved in evaluating asbestos sampling data and in writing the Cambridge Asbestos Protection Ordinance in the 1990s and designing the testing plan for the Russell Field reconstruction in the early 2000s. I strongly agree that there needs to be a second access point for maintenance vehicles on the Red Line, and that it should be in the vicinity of the Alewife T station. The Asbestos Protection Ordinance requires that any excavation or regrading at this site be done within an enclosed structure vented with HEPA filters, but this is explicitly not required for pile driving, which you cited as the difficulty you had with the ordinance. IQHQ has just completed much more extensive pile driving, excavation, and regrading on a much larger portion of the site than is the subject of the proposed high rail project, and they did so in strict compliance with the Asbestos Protection Ordinance. So, given that pile driving does not require an enclosed environment, why does the T's RAM plan for the excavation component not comply with the tent and vent requirements of the Asbestos Protection Ordinance? And secondly, has the T studied IQHQ's RAM plan or consulted with IQHQ's LSP to learn how they were able to achieve their construction objectives while adhering to the Asbestos Protection Ordinance? You mentioned that your project is materially different from IQHQ's in this regard. Can you further explain how that's the case? Thank you.
So, Joe, I'm going to hand this one over to you. We have coordinated with IQHQ, correct?
Yeah, we have. Yeah, we've had discussions with their LSP and had ongoing discussions with them just in general about everything. And I think where we really differ is that the depths of the asbestos contamination that we have, we really need to brace that excavation. And we have a very wide excavation. It gets up to nearly 120 feet wide, just because we have an entrance and exit into the tunnel. And that requires bringing in some very long struts for the bracing, and that would mean welding in that negative pressure area, which would be very dangerous as well. So I think those are really, apart from just the pile driving, it's kind of the wide excavation and then getting the struts in and doing the welding.
Thank you for that. We are nearing on the 2-hour mark. So I just want to be conscious of time and make sure that we've gotten to everyone's comments. Benjamin?
Yeah, more of a comment than a question. You've already mentioned that you are going above the legal minimum for asbestos mitigation requirements. I would just encourage that, given that the Alewife site is about to see a decade, maybe two, of construction and development around the garage, around all sorts of things, that the T really, really, really strongly consider following the Cambridge ordinance as best as possible without compromising on safety for things like welding, at minimum to keep a good working relationship with Cambridge going forward. That's all.
So I think stated earlier, where we practically can do things, we will be committed to doing them where we can make them work. And we're open to further discussions on means and methods.
Thank you for that. Noel?
Thank you. My name is Joel Nachik. I live just across Russell Field from Alewife Station and the IQHQ site. I've been there for 32 years, and I'm a founding member of the Alewife Study Group, which has worked for many, 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 many hours over 29 years, both regarding the W.R. Grace site, Russell Field, the T Plaza, IQHQ, and other parts of the neighborhood. I've also was a regular commuter on the Red Line for 15 years, and I'm an occasional user now, and I have very much support having a second access point for repair and maintenance vehicles on this part of the Red Line, and have noticed the improvements on subway service because of the current accelerated and repair and maintenance plans. So that's all good. But like other people have said, I have concerns about the site selection. And I'll just say that I definitely appreciate and respect all the work that all of you do for mass transit for our region. So please don't take what I'm about to say in the wrong way, but I think that, you know, it's too late now, but I think it would have been much better if you had, before you had a meeting that both introduced the project and a RAM plan meeting at the same time, to have just an introduction to the project and to explain, you know, more about why and where and what, and then really, you know, have the kind of listening that you're doing today with the community. Because again, with respect, I don't think we believe that contamination is the only significant negative of this site. The implications of the floodplain for the trees, the fact that this is one of the handful of most heat island vulnerable parts of the city and has a very large environmental justice community, and that the particular place that you're proposing to do the tunnel is exactly in the 4-acre meadow that IQHQ promised to the community as a community benefit for having increased. So I think if you had had a meeting with us first to kind of just present the plans and listen, you would have gotten a fuller idea of the various issues that we see. And I thought it might have been a much better way to begin. But given that, I do appreciate that that there's another year before the final design has to be completed and that you're committed to having more meetings. We will request an extension of the PIP, comment period for the RAM plan. I want to hear what's the specific mechanism to do that. But, us in the Alewife Study Group, we negotiated the AUL with Grace and DEP. We're the community liaison for it. We're the PIP representative for the community. We're the ones who initiated and got past the asbestos protection ordinance. So we're very, very knowledgeable about all the different issues that we're looking at, as well as the flooding and the trees and everything else. And we definitely will be in dialogue with you over the next weeks. And I think especially given that the Conservation Commission, first meeting of the Conservation Commission is in 3 weeks, it's just way too much to ask that we complete comments. And we'd really like to have a dialogue, not just submitting comments and then having you respond in writing. So we will request to extend the RAM plan comment period, and we look forward to dialogue and more community meetings. And if you can answer my question about the process for the requesting an extension of the PIP, please do. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. Appreciate the comments. And just say, hearing the feedback tonight, I sounds like we weren't perfect on this, but we're certainly committed to, at least for the introduction of the project, we're certainly committed to moving forward, ongoing dialogues in more participation from all you folks in the community. So with that said, Brian, can you answer the process question on trying to get a formal extension?
Yeah, I'm not sure of the formal process, but I think it would probably just go through us. I don't think anything goes through DEP for this. So I think it would just be requesting whatever time frame you need.
Okay, good. Yeah, my understanding is that DEP is not involved.
So there's not something that's on the books from a DEP perspective.
Correct.
Okay, so Joel, why don't you folks, put something in writing to us, and we're certainly open to it, if and we'll get back to you with that determination.
Okay, sounds good.
Excellent.
Thank you, Joel. Our next respondent, one moment. Charles, and then Kristen. Charles, are you able to unmute?
Am I here now?
Yes, you are.
Okay, this is Charles Teague. Two questions. You put up a plan during the PowerPoint. Does that plan actually show the flood storage you mentioned? And does it show the entire working area around the footprint of the tunnel? And then I have a second question.
Joe.
No, it does not show the floodplain in that area.
I didn't say floodplain. I said the footprint of where you're working, because you're going to put machinery next to the trench where you're cut and covering, right?
Right. Okay. Sorry. Misunderstood. Yeah, it does not show the work limits. The work limits that we have, we've capped at half an acre. It's just about at that. So it's probably,
Well, can you send us a plan with that?
We can come back and we can give you more of a presentation on everything that we're planning on doing from a construction standpoint. That's what we can do.
Right, because obviously, you said you had a plan for flood storage, so you obviously have a plan. You're just not have it tonight.
We don't have it available tonight to bring.
So the second part is there's mitigation for trees, and we have in Cambridge we have the and I mentioned, and I've presented this to the to people on MBTA staff on this call. We have the Urban Forest Master Plan, and we have the Cambridge Tree Protection Ordinance. There's another Cambridge ordinance which the MBTA has chosen not to comply with, because you don't have to, right? You're the T. So what I would like to see is a plan for mitigating the tree removals both here and the trees T cut down at Alewife Station, which actually staff is denied. But we can go and visit there and on site, and you can see for yourself. So the short version is, can you commit to at least the complying with the mitigation requirements of the Cambridge Tree Protection Ordinance?
I will say that we definitely intend to, based on the intent of it, yes.
Okay. And further, for other trees you cut down in Cambridge?
I can't speak to that beyond the project at this point. I'm sorry. I can right now, how I can answer you right now is the impacts within our project limits on this project. We will comply within the intent of the ordinance.
Okay.
If you have to go a little above and beyond, we're willing to do that as well. But we want to be cooperative. Let me just say, start there.
Actually, let me just rephrase. Can we just, schedule a meeting just about tree mitigation? No other, this should be relocated or contamination. No, none of these other issues. Not debating the removal of trees, but coming up with a mitigation plan. That's all.
As far as the project goes, which was within my purview and I can speak to publicly, yes, we can do that.
Okay.
Thank you, Charles. Kristen?
Hi there. My name is Kristen Anderson. I am an Arlington resident, and I have been riding the Red Line since 1987. I deeply appreciate the good work that you folks do, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to comment this evening. I am a founding member of Save the Alewife Brook. Save the Alewife Brook is a growing grassroots environmental advocacy group with supporters in Cambridge, Arlington, Somerville, Medford, and Belmont. Our main interests are water quality and flooding. Last year, the combined sewer overflow outfall at the MBTA's Alewife parking garage, that's CAM 401A, discharged over 20 million gallons of untreated sewage pollution. This sewage pollution flooded over the banks of the Alewife Brook 5 times last year, sending sewage floodwater into the Alewife Greenway path. The Alewife Greenway path is a widely used corridor that connects Medford, Somerville, Arlington, and Cambridge residents to the Alewife T. It passes through multiple environmental justice neighborhoods. We documented folks bicycling, jogging, walking, and pushing baby strollers through untreated sewage floodwater on 3 different occasions, 3 different dates last year during 3 different storm events. This is untreated sewage contaminated floodwater. They had no idea they were exposed to it. Me and my neighbors had the sewage floodwater in our homes that came right in through the back door, and it made us sick. And it's a terrible, terrible situation. Climate change is expected to increase flooding. And according to Cambridge's climate scientists, it is expected to exacerbate the combined sewer overflows by 2 to 4 times in 2 decades. There are 5,000 people who live in the Alewife's 100-year floodplain, and it should be noted that that population is not static, and neither is the floodplain delineation itself. It changes and it grows periodically when FEMA updates it. So I'm concerned. I'm concerned with flooding. A lot of people are talking about flooding tonight, so I'm asking the MBTA to do the good work that you need to do to provide access to fixing your equipment, but also to address, seriously address flooding, and to address flooding and the water quality problems, not only for today's storms, but also for future storms. And if anybody wants to speak to that, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for your concern, and it sounds like, just listening, it sounds like a suboptimal situation for a lot of reasons in relation to that and what's happening. I'm not tuned into the particulars of what's going on with that overflow, as it sounds like it's related to potentially the garage. But what we can do is probably take that internally and to see what can be done and included in other projects. Joe, I don't know if you can speak to how that, or if anything can be done with what we have in our project limits to address, and what we're doing from a flood perspective.
Yeah, I guess all I can say, Kristen, is that what we're going to do is not going to make the flood situation any worse. It sounds like what you're talking about is more regional problems, and I know there are more regional efforts in place with, Amelia Earhart Dam, raising that, and other things to kind of help combat, the sea level rise. So, I think to Brad's point, and maybe that's something, Brad, you take back internally to the T, but it sounds like it's probably a separate and much larger issue than kind of what we're talking about doing here, and certainly feel for you what you went through with, that sewage overflow.
Yeah, thank you. I just ask that you're mindful of the downstream communities as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So it looks like we've gotten all the questions and comments here in the chat, as well as with the raised hand, and we are right at 8 o'clock. So going once, going twice, going 3 times. seconds to make sure that we've been able to get everyone's content or comments before we wrap up at 8 p.m.
I see one hand up.
Joel. Hi, Joel. And that's your real hand too.
Yeah,
Nice.
that's me. This is actually something I put in the chat that, just to say, how soon will like the participants in this meeting, could we be sent a follow-up email that would give us all the ways to contact the T for, RAM plan feedback and other matters, and the link to the webpage for the project and everything like that? Will that be happening?
Yep. We, Ashley, what's our standard? But I mean, all this will be made public information. I don't want to steal your thunder. Go right ahead.
Yeah. So Joel, first, this recording will be placed on the project page website as well as the slides. And we'll also send a follow-up email to all the folks that have registered for the Zoom meeting with all the links that were shared in the chat. So we've shared the project webpage as well as ways to contact us, but we'll also include that in the email as well to all of you. And then if you have any follow-up questions or comments, you can reply back to us and we'll be sure to give you the response as well in consulting with this project team here on the panel.
That all sounds really great. Just one more specific question about it. Will there be a link to the RAM plan on the project webpage? That would be very helpful because it wasn't included with the meeting information. So for people to be able to review the RAM plan, they'll need to be able to have a way to get to it.
Joel, I think we can make that happen.
Good.
Right. Joe, team, we can certainly do that.
Sure. Good. Thank you very much.
Of course, Joel. It's a pleasure to see you again. Okay, so we are right at 8. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your questions and your comments and all the feedback that you provided. We've taken that into great consideration and it's well noted. We'll be emailing you a follow-up after the meeting with all the materials that we mentioned again. And then after that, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to us. And we've written our contact here in the chat as well. Thank you and have a good night, and we'll talk soon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.